Welcome to the next episode of What's in a Game. I am Will Jones, joined by Grace Jean, as always, but this time we have our first guest ever to join the What's in the Game podcast, and it is our friend from Nuggets Twitter. He talks NBA, he talks all kinds of things on his other podcast, which you should follow. We're going to have all his links below, but it is Zamora. How are you doing? And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. I am very, very honored to be your guys' first guest. You guys have a great show, great thing going on here. So very honored to be here and be the very first guest.
Yes. Grace, how are you doing, by the way?
I'm doing well. Yeah, we have Zamora from the Talkin' BS podcast. I can't wait to talk some BS with him.
Yes. Those of you who are not familiar with Zamora, if you're listening to this and you've never listened to his podcast, please do follow him on Twitter. But we want to get to know him a little more here. So let's start with your background and just tell us how you got into basketball, how you got into the Nuggets and podcasting in general.
I've been a basketball fan since I was a little kid, played basketball since I was little. The first team I actually started following, and I'm going to get killed for this, is the Lakers. So I am from Denver, but my uncle who helped raise me is from LA. And so growing up, he was a big Lakers fan. So I grew up watching the Kobe Shaq Lakers in the early 2000s and stuff. And so that was kind of what really sparked my love for basketball. And then, 2003, we draft Melo. And, I was like, I'm from Denver. All my family is from Denver. Everybody loves the Nuggets, even though they suck. So, I was never really a Lakers fan. I was just that was the team I knew, was in the NBA.
Well, they are so big. So no worries for being technically brainwashed into it. It's everyone knows the Lakers.
Not even gonna lie, I kind of was. I just, I thought they were really they were amazing. Shaq was incredible. Kobe was really good at the time. So, it was fun watching them. I just, and then my uncle was the biggest Lakers fan in the world. So, it was always oh, they're doing real good. They're a good team. Yeah, they're going to win championships, bunch of championships in a row. Oh, okay, they're really good. Cool.
And they did.
Yeah, and then they did.
And so how you said that when the Nuggets drafted Melo, is that what brought you kind of closer into the Nuggets fandom, being in Denver and all of that?
Yeah, I remember. So I remember the first day, because I remember the Nuggets in Denver were always an afterthought. They were never really talked about. Nobody really cared about the Nuggets growing up. And then I remember being at my cousin's house one day, and he was like, "Did you know the Nuggets are getting new colors and stuff?" And I was like, "Really?" So he showed me in the newspaper. It was the Rocky Mountain News, I think, and it was the baby blue and gold. And I was like, "Whoa, those are that's sick! Those are really cool colors. It's new." And then he was like, "Yeah, we're probably going to get either LeBron James or, Darko Milicic or Carmelo Anthony. We're going to get a new star player here." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So then, that really drew me in. And yeah, after that, I was bought in. Full on Nuggets from that point.
Nice. So do you also have you grown to really hate the Lakers since then? Or are you just fine?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's for the listeners.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people will have the Lakers as the worst, the worst thing imaginable to them. To me, they're bottom five. I personally don't like other teams a little bit more. I don't like Phoenix more than I dislike the Lakers. I've grown to dislike Golden State more than I've grown to dislike the Lakers.
Me too.
Will likes to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, they might be bottom three.
Okay, so you became a fan of the Nuggets, and you got through the kind of beginning stages of this Jokic era and you got to watch the Nuggets championship run. The reason that we wanted to have you on the show is that you have been doing all of these off-season breakdowns for a bunch of other teams, and you also did one for the Nuggets. And so we thought it would be awesome to have you on for this off-season overview. But I wanted to know what sparked your wanting to do this exercise of trying to fix our rivals like a traitor and kind of tell us like what that process is like for every team.
What sparked it was, I was just telling you guys beforehand, I kind of just wanted initially to push myself and learn how to do, like a show editing, doing all the, background stuff of producing a show by myself, all that stuff. So that was a small part of it. As far as the basketball stuff, I've always kind of felt like I'm more capable than a lot of other people at like being able to push my biases aside. Um, so I wanted to kind of flex that a little bit. Like, I just feel like I'm more of a fan of like the NBA and basketball in general than I am more of a fan of just the Nuggets. Like I love the Nuggets, but I've come from a time where they weren't good. And so, and I still loved basketball before then, there were times, like the Brian Shaw era, I was still keeping up with basketball, regardless, because like, I just love basketball in general. And I wanted to bring like a perspective to like give people hope, right? I wanted people to like be able to look at, one of my videos and be like, oh, okay, so there is hope for my team in this next season coming up, like we can, despite being so deep in the salary cap or without draft picks or anything, like there are still moves that can be made. So, I wanted to kind of give people hope and just, you know, bring, and also do it realistically, like I don't want it to be like ESPN, like LeBron James, where's he going to sign next? I wanted it to be like, you can get this guy on a vet minimum and he's going to come in and help fix the culture. You can bring this guy in and on a late draft pick and he's going to be like, a key contributor to the team off the bench. And, that little spark, can really change things for a team.
I thought it was like an keep your enemies closer thing.
No, not really. It's just, like I said, man, I love team building. I love, I just love being able to find those little niche things. Like, have you ever been a fan of a team and then you see a show or something and somebody brings up like a really interesting player that nobody else thought of, and you're like, wow, like that's a really good idea, that might work. And I just wanted to kind of provide that for other teams.
Yeah, I think people really like want to get that when they go and listen to stuff or, someone's podcast. They want to hear like interesting ideas or trades or like just construction ideas that they hadn't thought of, and especially the ones that are realistic.
Yeah,
for sure. And like I've been saying, the off season is really a time for optimism. So I like your perspective about it sort of being about hope, that like no matter what depths your cap sheet is under, and how few draft picks you have, there's always like ways to at least make moves on the margins. I wanted to know, was there any team in particular that has been the most frustrating? Because like you said, there is a range of flexibility versus constraints across these different NBA teams. And also what a particular team might need. Was any one of them like incredibly frustrating, and was one like very interesting because they had so many possibilities?
the Bulls were really interesting. They were really hard. I remember I had to spend a couple of days on them just because they're so deep in the cap, and they're intending on re-signing DeMar DeRozan and building around him still for some reason, while also trying to get back under the luxury tax, because Carnasovas, I think it was, said like there's no point in paying the luxury tax on a team that's not even going to be top 4 in their conference. So it was like, well, how do I do this now? The Warriors were incredibly challenging. That one took a while to do. they're trying to get
Because
under the
they
luxury
also claim
tax.
they're trying to, yeah, they're trying to like stay competitive or whatever,
Yes,
but have
they're trying to
stated
do
that they
both.
want to get under the luxury tax.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
makes no sense, but they're trying to do both. They're trying to stay competitive while cut their salary in half, because if they keep moving forward like this, they're going to start getting serious penalties for having such a high salary, you know? So, and then on top of that, Klay Thompson is a free agent, you know, arguably the second greatest Warrior of all time. And he's hitting free agency and he's telling them, you know, the money you're offering me isn't enough. I need more money. And they're like, we're trying to cut money here. Like, we're trying to stay competitive. We're trying to keep Steph happy. It was such a
Also
pain
pay
doing
Clay
that.
reasonably for where he is at in this stage of his career, you know?
Yeah.
Like, not really a max player anymore. But I mean, I think that that's something that the audience should know for sure, is that you actually try to adhere to the state, not just the flexibility constraints with draft picks or salary cap, but also adhere to the stated goals of the front office. Like, this is actually something that they could do to achieve this stated goal, even if it sounds ludicrous, like the Warriors trying to, the most expensive team in the NBA, trying to get under the luxury tax and somehow stay competitive or get competitive. I don't know how you'd phrase it for a team that missed the playoffs this year.
Yeah.
Before we jump into the Nuggets off season, I just wanted to give a very quick shout out to the Boston Celtics, who, in a shocking upset, did win the NBA Finals over the Dallas Mavericks. So I just wanted to give them a quick congratulations. There's this cute picture of Jason Tatum with his son Deuce under the confetti that I wanted to show. You know, they were the best team this year. They were the best team all year in the regular season and the playoffs, and they looked pretty dominant. You know, their competition aside, they took care of business with those who were in front of them. We're going to jump into the specifics of the Nuggets roster building concerns for the summer. But I wanted to just throw out a couple of key dates for Nuggets fans that want to know, like, what are the important times of the off season. So there are a couple of options coming up. KCP has his player option deadline on June 29th. Reggie Jackson has his player option deadline on June 25th. Vlatko Cancar has a team option deadline on June 23rd. Draft night starts on June 27th. The NBA is doing a 2-night draft this year. And so the second round is going to take place on the 27th. Sorry, the 26th is the first round. And then comes the moratorium period, which is the 5 days between July 1st and 6th, when teams can start negotiating with free agents from other teams. Right now, they're actually able to negotiate with their pending free agents that are currently on their rosters. And then starting on July 6th, free agency is officially open, and all of the deals that have definitely been being negotiated even outside of the legal times are going to come out and become official, and we're going to find out who's changing teams, who's staying on their teams, etc. That's also the day that Jamal Murray becomes extension eligible, and we're going to talk about those things in the context of the Nuggets roster soon. So for our first segment, what I wanted to do was kind of establish the battlegrounds for this Nuggets offseason and talk about how are we good? How are we bad? How do we need to improve? Right. So Will and I came up with this fact or fiction segment to assess what the particular strengths and weaknesses of the Nuggets were this season. So we'll just throw something out there about the Nuggets, and you can tell us if it's fact or fiction and elaborate as you see fit, Zamora. Will, do you want to do the first one?
All right. So the first point about the Nuggets that we want to bring up is, despite their flaws, the Nuggets roster this past season was good enough to win a title. Now, Zamora, you go first.
Okay. No, I'm just playing. I think so. Absolutely. I think they were. I think you can build your team up to be good enough to win a title. And then depending on injuries, depending on matchups, all that stuff, you just hope that you make it through the playoffs at that point. I think as far as like talent wise, we were at least a top 3 roster. Chemistry wise, we were number 1 probably in the NBA. So I think, those are probably my 2 biggest things. So I think absolutely we're right there. I think we just ran into a team that was built really well to defend what the Nuggets like to do, whether it was intentionally built like that or not. I think they just were like built well for that matchup.
I think that's a really good point that you make about all you can do is kind of build a roster that like has a chance, right? Because we're going to get into some questions of what the role of, the front office versus the coaches versus like what the players actually have to do on the court is in this. And a lot of what we're talking about is when we go through the offseason is the role of the front office in building up the roster to have a chance. But all of these things, interact. And so coming up with what the level of responsibility is for a general manager of a contending team anyway, it's going to be an interesting discussion. So our next factor fiction, the defensive improvement by the Nuggets, where they went from 18th in defense in the 22 to 23 season to 9th in defense. That's top 10, obviously. This past season was real. Fact or fiction?
Fact. I think P-Watt was a huge contributor to that. We've never had a rim protector like him. He's a very good perimeter defender as well. But most importantly, I think it was just chemistry, building on the things that they built last year. I think KCP, having a full year under Malone and knowing coming into this season, like what his full responsibilities were, knowing the weaknesses of his teammates and stuff like that, I think really helped, went a long way, being more comfortable with communicating with these guys and, knowing how to, like I imagine it's not easy going up to a 7-foot tall Serbian guy and telling him like, I need you to stand over here instead of over there when, I'm pushing a guy this way or something, like I think just stuff like that, the little things that we don't really think about. I think that goes a long way, especially on defense where like, defense is a lot of chemistry. It's a lot of communication, it's a lot of little things. It's not, offensive is more about being talented and hitting your shots and, can you handle the ball and stuff like that? Defense is more of like, can we be good teammates? Can we work together well? Do I understand that if you're pushing him this way, where I'm supposed to be positioned at to help you in the best way? Am I supposed to tag off of a guy because I seen him get a step on you? All those little things like that, I think are what really make a good defense a good defense.
Last year when we won the title, everyone was questioning our defense, and then we got to the playoffs and our defense rose up. Their level of play was definitely better than the regular season. This season, we improved defensively just overall throughout the season, but in the Wolves series, we were like frustrated with how the hell are we going to guard the Wolves? Like we don't have an answer for Ant, and we were unsure of what to do. And then P-Watt didn't even get to play. What was your like impression of how our defense was from the regular season to this playoffs?
It didn't take the leap that it did from, last year's playoffs. But I also don't think it was like there was that much more room to leap because of how good they were in the regular season. Ant is just a problem, man. Like Ant is ridiculous. He's just way too strong. He's like got the strength of a power forward, but he's also quick, like super quick laterally. Ant just has an incredible first step. If there's a bigger defender than him, like an Aaron Gordon or anything, he's just going to blow by him. It's pretty much impossible to really stop Anthony Edwards. There's just not a lot of defenders in the NBA who are capable of, slowing that guy down. That's why he was drafted number 1, right? He has the strength of, a power forward. He has the speed of a quick guard. He has the vertical of LeBron James. Like he has all the talent in the world. I think he's just
Like prime LeBron, not current
yeah,
LeBron.
he's putting it together. Just about him putting it together was the question mark for him, and he's starting to put it together.
I actually will say on that point that in the Wolves series, I thought our defense was okay, especially as the series went on. But it was one of those things like you talked about the defensive matchup issues that the Wolves give the Nuggets. But I think that that was a series where okay defense wasn't going to be enough if our offense wasn't going to be able to show up, and that's what happened in that series. I think more than even the defense. And it was one of those things where, okay, our offense is sputtering, but there were certain series where we have matchup advantages on defense. So we could be so stifling that it doesn't matter. But in that series, we don't have quite the same advantages. So our decent enough defense wasn't going to be enough when our offense couldn't show up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, when it couldn't carry it.
Our next factor fiction was it's really about the energy levels of the team. Do you think that the Nuggets, the players, we're talking about the starters for the most part, that they were only sluggish because of championship hangover? And you can talk about all of the starters as a group, or you can talk about them individually.
I think to an extent they were tired, just because I think Jokic was tired. He's had a past 4 years. He hasn't really had an off season,
Still not getting one.
Yeah, exactly. So I could see why, he's not. He looks so tired, and I mean, he played 47 out of 48 minutes. You can't really blame the guy too much for that. I think it's just like one thing I can't stand though is like we always talk about the Nuggets being tired. A lot of the times it comes down to Jamal Murray too, but there's always this narrative. Oh, the Nuggets are tired. The Nuggets are tired, but they play the same amount of games as everybody else. Everybody is at the same attrition levels. Granted there are injuries and, bumps and bruises here and there that, some teams pick up that others don't. But I just never really bought into the whole, the Nuggets as a whole were just too tired to pull that off. I think I think Jokic has a reason to be tired because he's carried this team for the past like 4 or 5 years. Especially when Jamal was hurt for those 2 years. And, he has to play for Team Serbia. He never really gets an off season or anything like that. But I mean, as far as the rest of the guys, I just don't really see why that would be a reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's this weird thing where like even MPJ, he had his first kind of full season where he played, what did he play, like 80 games or something? Or I don't know.
81.
Yeah, and we all loved that. We were like celebrating that. And I don't think, like, obviously he's not carrying the offense. And I don't know if some of his, lack of production, for lack of a better term, was due to him being tired. Like, it was more schematic and, like, matchup based where people were taking him away and, his off ball stuff was more difficult for him to integrate. But then we kind of look back on it all with hindsight and we're like, oh, I guess they were tired. That makes sense. And we're almost like rationalizing it a bit. But I was with you where I was like, I don't want to hear the excuses necessarily of being super tired because that's what every team is like. But I get, we did play until June. The Heat didn't have an amazing season either, but they had some injuries and things along those lines. But it's hard to reconcile all of it.
The Heat really didn't have an amazing season either. I will say just on that point that I do think that the answer differs between different starters and different types of players. Like I am willing to give a little bit more credence to that, let's say, explanation. I don't want to call it an excuse either because the fact of the matter is, like, do you want to win a championship or not? But when it comes to the bigs, from what we know about the physical toll that bigger players' bodies take as their minutes accumulate compared to other types of players, you can give them a little bit more, let's say, grace when it comes to like, okay, we really do need to manage their minutes during the season. But when it comes to, and you can give those two players in particular that grace because it's not like Jokic came into the season super conditioned anyway, but he has a really high floor. So it's like, yeah, we'd like a lot more from you or like a little bit more from you, but like, how much are we really asking? Meanwhile, you have a player like Jamal who never comes into the season conditioned. We can cross our fingers and hope that happens next year. And I'm one of the people doing that, but it's a lot less of an excuse for him because it's like you're not the same kind of big player. You don't have anywhere near the same kind of physical burden that AG or Yoke have, or even KCP when you think about the defensive assignments. With MPJ, you could be like, well, his shooting is clearly impacted depending on the amount of rest that he has, but he contributes in a lot of other ways. Whereas like when Jamal is like off, it throws everything off. And we saw what that looked like in these playoffs when he was probably the most off that he's ever been in any regular season or playoffs combined, right? And so there's multiple kind of components to that fatigue point.
I will say though too that
Yeah.
Jamal, for game 7, I'll at least give him a little bit of a pass just because that their game plan, they intended on tiring him out. Now, they knew he was susceptible to that, and you got to give the Wolves credit for, looking into that and being like, we've got to try to tire him out as much as we can. But they really sent Cat at him like repeatedly. They got the switch
You
on
mean
him
Ant?
as Cat and Ant.
Oh, you mean on
Yeah, Cat was
defense?
posting him up. Yeah, Cat was like
But
constantly posting him up, banging into him. So, I mean, that's tiring.
It is, but that's the thing is like we talked about this even we as like a fandom talked about this even last year, how that's basically every team's plan against Jamal. And this season he made it incredibly easy for that to be effective. Right.
Yeah.
We even saw it in the Phoenix series last year where it was effective for, I would say, a game and a half. I thought he was better in game 4 than game 3, but there were other problems with the way the team defense, whatever. But it's one of those things where it's like, okay, like, can you stop being this much of the weak point? Because it was an issue. So regardless of that game plan.
So this next question is about Calvin Booth's Project Dynasty, the 2-timeline plan. Does this 2-timeline plan end up like the Warriors?
I.e. a train wreck.
I.e. I don't think they won their championship that they won because of that plan. I think it was more I think by the time the Warriors didn't make the playoffs this season and it looks like Clay is on the way out, Kuminga is looking pretty good, but do the Nuggets seem like they'll be more successful than the Warriors where they're keeping their core and our young dudes are able to contribute?
I think that the expectations are very different. I think on a base level, you can say, oh, this is the same thing that the Warriors were doing because you're trying to bring in young guys to like supplement extra, I guess, bodies on, just to create depth on your team or whatever. But I think the Warriors kind of had a plan that these guys were going to be like their franchise guys, once Steph and Clay and Draymond were like getting older, like they phased out, Wiseman, Kuminga, and Moody would be able to take over and carry the load. And the expectations
Poole was part of that.
And Poole, Poole
right?
too. But the Nuggets don't have those expectations on these guys. The Nuggets' expectations for Christian Brown, for Peyton Watson, even Julian Strawther and these guys is come in and just be a good piece around Jokic. We have our star. He's not aging out anytime soon, hopefully. Just come in and be a contributor, play defense, hit your open threes. We're not asking you to be the face of the franchise or anything like that. So I think expectations wise, I think they're far more capable of reaching their expectations than Moody or Kuminga or any of those guys. So I think it's just a little bit different. And I think they'll be able to, I'm optimistic, I guess, but I think they're very well within the means to be able to reach those expectations.
Yeah, you draw a good distinction with the Warriors and the Nuggets because it's like, our guys are still here. They're not taking over for Jamal and Jokic. They're just trying to be like role players, which also brings up interesting questions about like drafting players and having these expectations of like, you're just supposed to be a 3-and-D role player in some regards instead of like developing them to their like specific strength. Which is, I guess, kind of why we like got rid of Bones.
Ideally, you're drafting guys that would be their
that is like their strength,
right?
But then like someone could maybe surprise you where you draft them to be like a 3-and-D, and then like who knows what they become. I'm trying to think of like an example of maybe someone who was like
Peyton,
slated to be a role player and then became, maybe like
a star.
or something like that, but I don't know.
Kawhi.
Yeah, Kawhi.
Yeah.
That's the
Right.
first one I thought of.
Yeah.
All right, so we talked about some of the good things. We had the defense. We talked about how the roster would have been good enough to win a title potentially if the team had been, maybe managed better. I'm just going to list off the major issues that we saw in the playoffs with the way that the team was currently constructed. So Jamal's health was an issue. We needed more ball handling. We knew that all year. The shooting was mid to bad. We had a lack of reliable starting lineups or lineups outside of the starting five. And we had an over reliance on the starters in the playoffs in that particular configuration. So I'll just say, throw it out there, fact or fiction, every major issue that the Nuggets had in the playoffs were completely foreseeable based on what we saw in the regular season.
I think you could say that. There were indicators, right? There were things that, I guess, statistics that would pop up. I mean, I remember Matt Moore specifically was like shouting, for like the last month of the season, like, there are significant indicators here that the team isn't as good as it used to be and all this stuff. It was kind of, I don't know, came off as like grumpy old man or whatever. But
he kept ignoring some of the good stuff too, which made it kind of annoying. There were other indicators that we were better than last year, but
yeah. But he
the
was
problems
focusing on the
definitely
negative
reared their
ones.
heads.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, though, I just think like the playoffs are such a different beast than the regular season that you can take like 90% of the data that you've gathered throughout the regular season and kind of throw it out. I mean, there are teams that like frankly will like lose to a team over and over and over again, and then in the playoffs just be way better than them.
Sweep them.
Yeah,
like the Wolves with the Suns.
Minnesota and Phoenix, right? I think there's just so much noise in the regular season. There's just so many factors that just do not come into play when it comes into the playoffs. There are indicators and stuff like that, but
doesn't the Celtics run this year and the Nuggets run last year show that like the regular season does matter in terms of showing you who the best teams are, what their strengths are, etc., right?
I think like there are flashes, right? I think there are points in the season where a team shows you their true character and like who they really are, especially if they get to a point where like their backs are against the wall and stuff like that. I mean, look at the reason I was so high on the Nuggets this year was like their huge stretch run after the All-Star break and, beating the Celtics twice this year. They're just like things like that you kind of have to focus on a team pretty consistently throughout the regular season to like see these things. And, that's why a lot of fans will be like, oh, my team is different, I don't know. I
As
just
it
feel like
turns out, we weren't different.
yeah, but we were a contender, like we were a really good team. I think if we would have beat the Wolves, we would have had just as good a chance to beat the Celtics as anybody else. I just think like you see those special moments throughout the season.
So you've identified several weak areas with the team analytically based on the regular season, since we're on the topic. If we could fix all of it, we would, right?
Yeah.
But could you pinpoint 2 or 3 specific areas that you would prioritize this off season and why those areas above the other, problem areas?
Ball handling. It was driving me nuts all year long. I mean, I was saying this well before the All-Star break that we need another ball handler because Jamal was getting injured. Colin and Jalen were just not ready. Reggie, well, he looked decent at the beginning of the season. Like he looked like he could do it, but it was like if Reggie is the only guy that you have, backing up Jamal, like it's just not enough. I'm coming from like the Tim Conley era of like you have Will Barton, Monte Morris, Jamal, all these guys.
It was just never an issue before.
Yeah, we kind of sacrificed all of our playmaking for size. Like you said one time, like there's just trade-offs, it's about trade-offs, There are just things that you have to sacrifice. And unfortunately, we sacrificed so much ball handling to cover some of the other areas that we were lacking in ball handling now. And it really showed itself in the playoffs.
Yeah, your ball handling is your number one priority. Playmaking is really important on on this team, on any team, especially for playoff versatility. That's an argument that I've heard a lot of people make, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Even with the multiple year sort of success of the Boston Celtics, like even if they don't make the finals or win a chip like they did this year, they're in the conference finals every single year, and they always have a lot of ball handling on the floor between Tatum, Brown, whether it was Marcus Smart or Derek White, and this year they also added Drew Holiday, right? And it's just like you constantly have guys on the floor who can make plays, and that's really helped their playoff versatility. So I want to start getting into all of the questions that the Nuggets have this offseason, and we'll address your biggest concern with ball handling later on. There's a lot that the team actually has to look at, despite being, it's going to be a relatively quiet offseason compared to other teams. But there are a couple of players that we have that are potentially extension eligible, and KCP is one who might just leave in free agency. Keeping him almost certainly requires that the Nuggets go into the second apron. Can you explain to the listeners the roster-based consequences of going into the second apron with our salary cap, and why fans care about how much money the team is spending on the roster?
Okay. So the new CBA is super confusing for people. I've been working with it pretty much every day for like, I want to say like the last 2 or 3 months. And I still have like a ton of questions about it. Just the wording and stuff of it is so confusing. The biggest thing I think that's going to affect the Nuggets like immediately is going to be the fact that we will no longer be able to aggregate contracts for trades. So a lot of people are clamoring for Zeke Naji and Reggie Jackson to be traded. Well, their contracts would add up to around $14 million. If you traded them, you cannot bring in a player who is worth $14 million themselves. You cannot add the two salaries together to combine and make a bigger salary for another player. You can't do sign and trades for another team's player. If you are above the luxury tax, your draft pick 7 years down the line gets frozen. So our 2032 pick would get frozen, meaning we would no longer be able to have access to it to trade it for any upgrades. And then on top of that, this is the dumbest rule, I think. Like, this is my least favorite part of the entire CBA. If you stay within the luxury tax, I believe 2 out of 4 years or 2 out of 3 years, your draft pick gets knocked all the way back to the end of the first round, regardless.
That's second apron though, right? Not luxury tax.
Oh yeah. You're right. Yeah. So that is second apron.
Which is what is relevant to our team anyway.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to be in. We're going to be above the second apron. So if we're in the second apron again next year, our 2032 pick that was frozen will get knocked to the back of the first round. And we will have to move ourselves back under the luxury tax for 2 out of the next 4 years after that. So the earliest we would have access to that pick is the summer of 2029. It's just, I hate that rule so much. I think that's just so like Bush League, in my opinion, to like move your picks to the end of the round.
They're really punishing.
It's weird, right?
I will say though, the more I thought about that particular rule, the more I realized that if you're a team that's spending into the second apron, you're probably pretty good, unless you just suck, in which case you probably shouldn't be spending that much on your roster. And like the fact that we're 28 in the first round now, so like getting knocked back, and who knows what other teams may also be there, and then it becomes like there's like some tiebreakers after that if there are multiple teams that are under the same penalty. So I almost like care about that one the least, but the inability to trade future picks definitely affects like flexibility between now and, you know, when that pick would either be made or traded, right?
I think it's the least likely to happen. You know, I don't think it's ever, you know, you got to be pretty bad to like end up getting that punishment. I just think the punishment itself is just kind of a weird punishment. It just doesn't seem like a commissioner of a professional league would do that. But I don't know. I don't know.
What are the arguments for keeping KCP despite these rules? And how high do you think the front office should be willing to go on his salary and years overall contract?
So I think the alternative in itself is the argument. I think if you let KCP go, you end up, I think you would be under the luxury tax. Either way, we gain an exception. We either gain the taxpayer mid-level exception or the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. And in that case, you're bringing in somebody who's like a decent player, like a role player. Just for like context, KCP is probably going to get at least like $20 million a year on this next contract. So if you're going and trading off a guy who's worth $20 million a year and bringing in somebody who's worth like 12 at best, you're not going to get the same caliber player. Essentially, that's just what the trade-off is like you can let KCP walk, gain that little bit of flexibility, and be able to sign somebody who's not as good. Ideally, so I think personally, and I've seen other numbers thrown around, to me, the key number is 25 million. I think a team is not going to realistically offer KCP more than 25 million. If they do, I think Denver would be wise to like let him walk at that point. That's just too much for, a role player, especially your fifth best player on the team, to be making that much money. If it's anywhere between 20 to 25, where he is most likely going to get offers, I think Denver matches it and he comes back. That's why I'm like really optimistic that he's just going to come back. Because I think $25 million, no team is willing to offer that. And anything less, we'd be willing to match. So I'm like, it just makes more sense that he's going to come back to Denver anyway.
Yeah.
I hope we're willing to match it. Because honestly, I think that even if another team's offering 25 billion plus, we should just offer slightly less than that and add on another year.
Try to like make it, an incentive for him.
Yeah, just like we're still offering you more overall. Yeah.
It's more about the security for him anyway. The security of,
exactly.
you're going into
especially
your
at
later
this point in
stages
his
of your
career, you probably want a longer deal.
Exactly. So that could definitely work. I think the max that I would be comfortable giving him, like I would begrudgingly giving him a 4-year, $25 million contract. I think that I'd be like,
that's a lot. Like for 4 years, I would go much lower. Like I would be at
that's what I'm saying. I'm like,
for 4 years. Yeah.
At that point, I'd be like, okay, you're strong arming us. We need you. I'll give it to you with the idea that I might be able to trade you away in like a year or two if Christian Brown really like steps up and stuff. Anything more than that, I probably wouldn't be good with.
Yeah. So let's go with scenario 1. KCP comes back for something in the 20 plus million, maybe below 25. Do you have players that you think the Nuggets should target on those minimum deals, if that's the case?
Gary Harris. Yeah, I think Gary Harris would be a really good option at that point. I think Gary Harris is probably one of the better players you could get for a minimum. I don't know if, he would fit, like Grace was saying, like we have a lot of wings already. I'm a really big fan of Gogo Batadze from Orlando. Like I've been saying this for a while now.
Just give us Orlando Magic players. Just give us.
Yeah, right. That's what I'm saying. Like they have all the answers that we're looking for. He's like he's a really good center. Like he's not a starting center or anything like that. But like as far as backup wise, like he's big. He's like 7 feet, 260. He has a post game. He's a really good low post defender. He's decent at rim protection. He's a really good passer for the position. He's just steady. He's just solid. He's good at all the stuff you really want from a backup center. The Magic played really well when Wendell Carter Jr. was out, and he was able to step into that starting role. Like,
yeah,
I don't think a lot of people are really going to offer him a lot of money or anything like that. I think he's, a sneaky candidate that the Nuggets, he's one of those guys. I think Booth, you know how it is. Like sometimes we're like, you just see a name pop up and like the general audience is like, who the hell is this guy? I think he's going to be like one of those guys.
So I was just wondering, because you mentioned ball handling as your main priority, but I wouldn't say that Gary Harris would address that issue. And obviously Goga Bitadze would be great to address the hole at backup center. But is there anybody that you would want to target on the minimum market for ball handler, or are you thinking more the trade route to address that particular hole should KCP stay, right? Because we're talking about minimums because those are all we would have if KCP stayed. But even if he does stay, you'd still want to address ball handling, right?
Yes, of course. The problem is And this was a problem I had ran into when I was doing my offseason preview for the Nuggets, was the minimum point guard free agent market is pretty bad. Like Reggie
Yeah.
Jackson literally might be the best of all those guys. I mean, you're talking about guys like Killian Hayes. You're talking about guys like Jordan Goodwin, Ish Smith. Like those are the kind of names that are available in free agency for a minimum contract. So like that was one of the things that I had noticed was like, oh, maybe I could just go sign a backup point guard in free agency for a minimum and trade for a backup big or, something like that. And yeah, I was just like really disappointed in the in the point guard free agent market.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad.
That's the thing, is like skill is expensive in the NBA, right? I actually think that
Yes.
like Reggie for the mini mid level last season was probably an okay deal in retrospect because of that.
Yeah, I
Because I don't
agree.
think he would have gotten better for a minimum,
Yeah.
or even equal Reggie for a minimum, really.
Yeah. And Reggie would have been a lot
Last
better
year,
if he hadn't had to like play so much,
like as
especially at
many
the
minutes
beginning of
as
the season.
Jamal last
Yeah,
year.
exactly. I think he would have been a
Yeah.
lot more, durable, or I don't know. He would have just been more potent, later on in the season if he hadn't worn himself so thin during the early parts of the season.
So in that case, do you think we would get more options to get a better ball handler if KCP walks? Because we have a little more flexibility besides minimum dudes. And then like with that, is there anyone else like or people that you had like slotted in or hopeful for if KCP walks?
The point guard market in general, even besides just the minimums, is not that good. Period. This year, it's at least for agency wise, there's kind of a gap. It's like there's like James Harden is probably like the worst of like the guys who are going to get serious contracts, and then it like seriously drops off to like those minimum level type guys. There's just like not a lot of options there. Like in the offseason preview I did for the Nuggets, the way I went about it was I ended up trading Zeke Naji and Julian Strawther, I think, for Trey Mann, just because I think the best way to go about getting a backup point guard on the team is through a trade. I just think there's just not a lot of other options on the open market. Whether you like Trey Mann or not, you can use those salaries and just try to find another point guard. I mean, another one I did, I had sent this to Ryan Blackburn, that he used in his show, was Zeke Naji and Reggie Jackson. I threw in Julian Strawther because I don't see the reason why they wouldn't do it without Julian Strawther.
Mm-hmm.
But he said that they would take it without Julian Strawther. But Zeke Naji and Reggie Jackson for Vasa Micic and Nick Richards.
I don't think we would have to include Julian in a deal like that.
You don't think so either?
Yeah, because I don't think that we should have, even if we had to include somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
I think Micic is a contract that they could just get off of, and we're also giving them a good young player with some upside. I wouldn't like that, and I know part of it is like trying to move Zeke's salary too. So there's that piece, but I don't know that I'd quite go as far as giving up our first round pick from last year to dump Zeke's salary. Because I think we're actually doing them a little bit of a favor by taking Micic. Or if anything, it's neutral.
That's honestly part of the reason why I got off of that idea as well. I just was like, Micic, it's just like, oh, okay, we have a backup point guard now. It doesn't like solve
not somebody with some like real juice, like a ball handler that
can solve a lot of the problems the Nuggets actually have.
Okay, so we talked about the scenarios with KCP either extending with us or leaving. Another player who's extension eligible this summer is Jamal. He's eligible for a max extension, 4 years, $204 million, which would put him at right around a little over $50 million a year. Should the Nuggets offer Jamal a max extension, if they offered it, should Jamal take that max extension, given, he has an opportunity to try to go for all NBA again next year, but he also has an injury history. And who knows what could happen down the line next season, how the front office will be evaluating the team at that point.
If I'm Jamal's agent, I'm like, take the deal, dude. Like, what are you doing? Take the deal. It's a max contract. Take it, sign it immediately. It's insurance. You're good. You're gonna have all that money. Just take the deal. Jamal, on the other hand, though, I just feel like he's such a competitor, and he's like, he just believes in himself so much. He has that much confidence. I think he's like, I don't need to sign this right now. Now, I'm not 100% sure on that. This is my hunch, just from everything I've learned over from Jamal over the years. I just think he's willing to bet on himself. I think if there's any player in the NBA who's willing to bet on himself, it's Jamal Murray. I don't know. Me personally, I would be hesitant giving him a max deal, just because of the injury history, because of what's the nicest way to put this? Just because he hasn't ever reached an all-star. He hasn't ever reached an all-NBA level season. And to be...
There wasn't even one where it was like, oh, he was close, but there was just a lot of competition. Like, there hasn't been a season where you're like, oh, he was snubbed for all-star or all-NBA.
Right. But even then, it's like, for somebody earning $50 million a year, I want somebody who's at least like, no, he's an all-star. Like, let's not...
Yeah, all-star for sure.
Yeah,
Even
like, he's not
all-star caliber. Like, you could say, like, okay, it's hard for the guards, especially in the West, but I don't think that Jamal would have made an all-star game in the East even this season.
No,
Where
probably
it's
not.
not as competitive.
Yeah, there's some good guards in the East.
Like, what is the urgency level around this Jamal extension, as far as like the Nuggets and Jamal being on different wavelengths? Because I think a lot of fans and general fans of the NBA, not even just Nuggets fans, aren't talking about this a ton. I think most people are just like, yeah, Jamal, he's good. He's going to be with the Nuggets. They're going to lock up their stars. Is there a ton of urgency around this, or do you think it's just like, no matter which way he goes, whether he takes it or he thinks he's going to prove something with All NBA or All Star, is this something to like worry about, or are the Nuggets and Jamal going to be happily married pretty much for his whole career?
It's similar to the KCP thing. It's like, what's the alternative? You could let him walk, and then it's like, well, then who's your number two? So I think as long as that's the case, he's probably just going to be a Nugget, especially with the way that this new CBA works. It's like, they incentivize you a lot to like retain your guys. Free agency is kind of a thing of the past in a way. It's like, just re-sign your guys, especially your top 2 or 3 guys. Bring them back and build your core. So I think that's a big reason why like nobody's really concerned about it. It's just like, what are they going to do? Like, let him just leave?
I think the tension, as I see it, really has to do with, I don't think that Jamal could have a worse playoffs than he did last year. I hope not. His regular season was fine when he was on the floor for the most part. He had made some improvements, but he couldn't stay on the floor consistently, right? Like I said, the injury history. Let's say the Nuggets go a little bit further in the playoffs next year. Let's say they even make the finals, but they don't win a championship. But Jamal has the same regular season that he had the last 2 years, where 20 points per game. Let's say he plays a few more games, like, I don't know, 65 games instead of 50 something, and doesn't make that leap, doesn't make All-Star, doesn't make All NBA. He's going to be max extension eligible next summer, but I think the Nuggets are an organization, and we talked about this when they gave Jamal the rookie max extension. They gave MPJ the rookie max extension, even when there were questions about these guys. That was under different front office leadership, but I imagine, based on the comments they made even last summer, that they would put the max offer deal in front of Jamal this summer again. But if we have another season where they don't win a championship, even if they make it far, and Jamal doesn't show out again in the regular season, does a conversation come where it's like, hey, if we offer you this max extension, we're automatically like deep into the second apron. It severely limits our flexibility, and we don't know if you can consistently be that guy. And like we talked about with like the fatigue factor and all this stuff with particularly Jokic, if like Jamal showing up in the regular season does matter for the postseason, if only to take some of the regular season burden off of the other guys, right? Especially he's the say 2A in the playoffs, a 1B on this team, then a question becomes, do we try to get an extension done with him that is less than a max to sort of accurately account for his contribution to this team? Let's say that he has a playoffs that say isn't as bad as this year, but isn't as great as last year's, and they don't win a championship, and he has another lackluster regular season. And then we're facing more roster crunch because of where the rest of the salary cap is. That's where I see the tension is. If you don't take it this summer, which I feel very confident they're going to offer it, do you leave the front office liable to change their mind once there's more tension on the rest of the roster points, right? Because AG becomes extension eligible next year. Who knows what they're going to want to do with, other guys in the roster, moves they might want to make depending on how the playoffs go, right?
Yeah, that's very fair, because like you said, you have to kind of account for the actual production that the player is, you almost have to attribute a percentage of like how much we win and kind of match that to like your salary figures, like, oh, Jokic earns like 35% of the cap because he contributes like 80% of why we win.
Yeah, like he is way positive value on that contract.
Exactly. Yeah. So you have to, like you said, you have to bring positive value to the contract itself. But I could, now that you say that, I could see that.
If only, and I said this when Will and I talked about that end of season press conference where it's like, hey, the tension isn't that I think the team would just let him walk or that we would maybe even want to trade him. It's more, we have to rethink the way that the roster is built if we can't count on you to contribute in a way that is at least proportional to the amount that's taking up on the cap because of these other restrictions on the way that we build the team, right?
Basically,
so it's less about like Jamal's not worth this. It's like we have to make up for these deficiencies that Jamal has relative to his deal. So now we have to like maybe rethink that deal so that we can make up for those things with the rest of the roster.
Yeah.
Right.
We basically have to, do we have to start treating you like a number 3 and paying you like a number 3 because we need to find an actual number 2 who's going to cover the holes that we see as deficient.
I'm worried that this whole CBA thing and like these teams being crunched, that a lot of front offices are going to be going with this, like convincing dudes to take team friendly deals instead of like, in the past where you're throwing out huge contracts and the cap's going up year to year and you can trade that at some point. Like it doesn't really matter how much money because there's exceptions to get over the tax. There weren't these punitive measures in place to deter teams. So I'm like really worried that some kind of like crazy dynasty is going to happen because you're going to get like a Derek White type player to take $10 million a year on a contract or something just because they're like, hey, if you want to win and be on this team, like,
players have no reason to do that though.
Unless they
players that good have no reason to do that because the cap's going up every year. So there's actually some incentive for players. Like, let's say Derek White was traded to the Celtics like closer to when this CBA happens. He might have taken a shorter term deal with the Celtics once they finally like signed him, just so he can enter free agency sooner. So when the cap is going up even more, right? So that's another part of this dynamic. There are definitely going to be some unintended consequences, but I think that some of these things are going to start to even out in ways that we didn't necessarily expect. So some players are going to get screwed with these more team-friendly deals and whatever extensions, but then you'll also have, like, one of the new rules is there's a salary floor, so you have all these like bad teams that don't spend money that now have to spend a certain amount of money, so they're giving like Fred VanVleet $40 million a year, or who knows what the Pistons are going to try to do with all of that cap space they have because they can't just leave it empty anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to talk about the internal developments in the Nuggets because another part of the offseason is what are the players that are already on your roster that will still be on your roster going to do to improve. Out of the Booth boys, that is Christian, Julian, and Peyton, who do you think is the most likely to make the biggest leap of the three between this past season and next season? And then separately, whose leap do you think would be the most beneficial to the team, given our needs?
That is a good one. I'm inclined to say Peyton, I think, would probably take the biggest leap just because I think his ceiling is the highest. His defensive instincts and the stuff that he can do athletically are just things that, frankly, I have not seen too many other players be able to do.
Yeah.
I think he has all the potential in the world to like be a really, really good player. Like I think he could be a legit star in the NBA. If he can consistently knock down a 3-point shot at, let's say, like 36, 37%, I think that instantly vaults him to like making him like a really legit role player. And I think that's very doable this year. If he can knock down 40% of his threes, then he's a legit like star level, almost like role player, like almost like AG or KCP, like they're a star in their role. I think because his ceiling is so high, I just think if he can hit any part of that, just improve something offensively to the point where he becomes just dangerous, just something to be concerned about. I think that just opens
Yeah.
up a ton for him.
I actually think the ball handling, if he can
That
tighten
too.
that up, because it's not like he's new to it. He played point guard when he was younger, but then he went through growth spurt and then he wasn't in that role anymore. So he doesn't have as much experience with it. But we've seen these flashes of like him in transition. He can really collapse a defense in
Yeah.
ways that were kind of shocking to me because I'm like, guys, he's not like a good finisher. I think the finishing could be like a really big improvement for him.
Yeah.
But then he collapses the defense and then creates good stuff for the other players on the team. So I think I completely agree. We're talking about these young players now, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on the NBA draft because the Nuggets hold the 28th overall pick in the first round and the 56th pick in the second round. Can you give us your picks for your players that you're looking at for those picks? And then also kind of weigh the sort of upside, I guess, of those potential prospects with an idea that Michael Malone had, or it's not his idea necessarily, but he kind of subtly threw out there that like maybe we'll trade the 28th pick for a win now player on his Jim Rome appearance and, coach versus front office incentives. He's kind of using the media to his advantages there. And Moch is he thinks he's slick, but we see him. So just give us your thoughts on the draft and that pick in particular.
I think Booth is going to use it. I don't think he's going to trade it. I think he enjoys drafting players and, picking guys that, he sees potential in and thinks would work really good with this team. So I think that's like one of the things that he really likes about the job. I mean, he's pretty good at talent evaluation from what I've seen. So I think he's going to use it. The 28th pick, I think, we're going to stay there. This is just a hunch. I think we're just going to stay there. I think some guys a lot of people want Deron Holmes from Dayton. I think that'd be a fine pick. He brings a lot of the stuff that the Nuggets need, right? We need a backup five. He's really interesting because he's a good lob threat. He's a good rim protector. He can shoot threes. He can stretch the floor. He's almost like Miles Turner light, kind of. I think the comp that I used was Jalen Smith. Another one that I actually came up with recently was Maxi Kleber. Kind of a weird one. He kind of reminds me of Maxi Kleber a little bit. And the way that he's not a very good rebounder, but he's big. But yeah, I think a lot of people want him. But in my opinion, and this is who I used on my offseason preview was Terrence Shannon Jr. I don't want to get into the whole, court case and everything like that. Just schematically, he brings a ton of what Denver needs. Now, he is a wing, and this is part of the reason why on my offseason preview, I proposed sending Julian Strawther out on a trade. We have so many wings already, but I just think he provides something that would fit super, super well, especially with our bench unit. He's a really, really good defender. His first couple of years in college, he was more of like a defensive specialist, and he was like really good at it. He was like one of the best defenders in college. And then he switched schools, I believe, and they asked him to become a more, offensive, pick up more of an offensive workload. And he ended up averaging, I think, 23 points a game. He is by far, in my opinion, the best transition player in college. An example I've used quite a bit now is whenever talking about him is I heard somebody say this, that there were 3 guarantees in college last year. One was a Zach Edey post-up score. One was Dan Hurley outsmarting you. And one was a Terrence Shannon Jr. bucket in transition.
Is that like UConn ATOs? Is that what they were talking about with Dan Hurley?
I think so, probably. But yeah, he's super good in transition. He's really good at picking up fouls. I think he had I don't even remember, but he was picking up fouls left and right. Super athletic, really good transition player. Strong kid, NBA ready. He's like 23 years old, I think, when he gets drafted. He's gonna be like 23. I believe he's everything that the Nuggets could use, especially on that second unit. And I honestly believe Christian has so much stuff to work on that I'm not 100% convinced that he's going to end up being our starting 2 guard at some point, just because he is so raw offensively. And there's just there are things that I think could unlock his game, like a ball, like handling. I think if he learned how to handle, he'd be a really good player. I think that would unlock so much for him. But until we see it, I'm not sure that's actually going to happen. I think TSJ, 2 years from now, could very well be our starting 2 guard because he can handle the ball. He's a really good defender. He's a big kid. He's really strong. He just fits really well in all the stuff that Denver really lacks in.
Yeah, I agree with you with Christian on the ball handling point for sure. Right now, I definitely feel a lot more comfortable with him just trying to turn into a super 6th man more than I see him becoming a championship caliber 2 guard because of, like you say, that offensive rawness.
Booth answered that question at the press conference at the end of the season, saying, if you haven't been watching Christian and you don't think he's a starter, I don't know what you're looking at.
He's a starter. He can be a starter.
Yeah, but
I don't know.
His role is going to be better for us as a 6th man.
Terrence Mann is a starter,
Oh,
I mean, I think Christian's a starter, but I don't see him as a start. He's going to be a starter in the NBA. I think that's I took the same thing away from Booth's comments, that he's going to be a starter in the NBA. I can see that, but I don't know that he's a starter on a championship caliber team, especially at the 2 guard spot.
Yeah.
At least until he develops a little bit more.
Exactly.
With the 56th pick, do you have your eye on anyone there, or do you have any other alternative opinions with that pick specifically?
I do actually. And this is, I talked to CT Fazio about this, and I've talked to actually a few people, and they're all, everybody kind of scoffs at it. There's a kid in the 2nd round by the name of Quentin Post who plays for Boston College. And there are people who are saying he's not even going to get drafted. I cannot for the life of me imagine why he would not get drafted. I personally even asked CT, you've done all this work on him. Would it be worth drafting him with the 28th overall pick just to ensure that we get him? And, CT was like, I mean, I wouldn't reach that high for him, but he is a good player. So he's a big man. He's 7 feet tall. He's another NBA ready guy. He's, I think, a 5-year senior, a 5th-year senior. The knocks on him are that he doesn't move laterally well, and he's not a great rim protector or anything. But everything I've watched, I've seen him get beat off the dribble, but what center doesn't get beat off the dribble? He looks fine to me. He really does. Defensively, especially, he looks perfectly fine to me. I think he's perfectly capable. He's not burly. He's not plotting and doesn't know how to move or anything. He knows how he can move for as big as he is. He's a pretty good rim protector. I've seen him go up and block a lot of shots. And offensively, he is everything that Kalel Ware and Deron Holmes bring. He's a spacer. He's, I think, almost 40% from 3. He's got a really nice touch. I will say he's a bit addicted to his dominant hand. He was really addicted to his dominant hand. But I mean, everything I've seen from him is just stuff that can be coached up. I think he's really, really good. I think he's I think he could really come in and be our backup center next year.
I love hearing that. Any
Yeah.
good candidates for backup center, please come on down.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if I would immediately. I would still try and go get a guy like Goga or, somebody else on the open market or something, just to give him that time to like develop and everything.
Yeah.
He's a second round
For
pick.
sure.
I'd definitely offer him a two-way, even send him down to the G League and stuff like that. Take the traditional path of a second round pick. I think if worse comes to worse, I think there's worse options with that second round pick, especially that late.
Okay, well, thanks, Zamora, for coming in to talk about this Nuggets offseason overview. It's offseason has, officially started since the finals ended, but it's been relatively quiet, except I woke up to, Monty Williams being fired this morning.
That was dirty. They did that to him.
I mean, he's probably fine with it.
He's living the sweet life now.
We're going to move on to our mailbag segment. We got some mailbag questions, including one that actually came from ZamoraBSB on Twitter. And
Really?
So we'll just kind of go around and get through these mailbag questions. The first one is from ZamoraBSB on Twitter. And Zamora asked, what made you guys fall in love with the game and specifically with the Denver Nuggets? Will.
Okay. Well, I am from Denver, so there was that. I also followed other teams, much like Zamora, like at a younger age. Like I loved Allen Iverson. I loved Shaq and Kobe. So I did have I had a Magic Shaq jersey and a Lakers Shaq jersey. But I still would follow the Nuggets and hope that they would be good, like when Melo was here and all that. But I fell way more in love with the Nuggets once Jokic joined, because he's just like a magical player. Like, when have you ever seen anyone like him? And I just remember, I don't remember when he joined, what I was doing when he joined the team. It was too long ago. I was probably like I was still in college or something like that. But I was not paying too much attention to the Nuggets. And my brother was like, there's this Serbian dude on the team who throws these crazy passes. So like the Nuggets are going to be great now. That's what really did it for me with the Nuggets.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And your brother has good taste, right? So
Yeah.
I've talked about this a little bit. I got into the Nuggets last year during the playoffs, and I was rooting for them to beat the Timberwolves because I didn't like the Wolves for some reason. But the series that really solidified my fandom for the Nuggets was really the Suns series, especially that game one, like Jamal and all of the fire that he brought. Obviously, Jokic was just incredible. But on top of that, I really do think Jamal is like the soul of this team because of how amazing it is when he's on. Because when he's on, it just brings a different energy to the team and to the fan base. Cool. So our next question comes from Lucas Kaplan.
Hold on. I want to get one so Zamora can participate with this question.
I get to participate in my own question?
I know, but I just want to ask one follow-up on, because I know we went through his background and all that, but was there a moment with this current Nuggets team in the Jokic era where you knew we had a chance to win a championship, or you remember being like, whoa, the Nuggets are going to be on another level?
The stretch after the AG trade.
Oh, okay.
When we got AG, because I loved AG before. I was upset that the Magic, I felt like they just didn't do enough for him. In retrospect, that was kind of dumb. I think they kind of did everything they could, but I just was like, he could be a superstar. They're just not treating him right and all this stuff. He just has to go to a good team. And then he came here. So I was really excited when he got here. There were fireworks, man. Those first, 9 games were just insane. Beating the brakes off the Clippers when the Clippers were the scariest team in the league. Man, yeah. And then Jamal went down, unfortunately.
Yeah, what a time to really get into be super hopeful about the Nuggets.
Yeah, to see that, just seeing that team and then just have it taken away from you for 2 years was just heartbreaking.
It was brutal. All right, let's go to Lucas Kaplan's question now, Grace.
So Lucas Kaplan asks, what could be the next league-wide tactical trend that teams start to embrace? And he said it could be as specific as guards in the dunker spot or size, like we've seen recently.
I think that teams are going to just purely focus on bringing in playoff caliber players. So basically, just they're going to focus really hard on finding players who are capable of playing on both sides of the ball and just not being specialists. I think like the specialist role is going to kind of die out. I just think there's no room for it anymore. I think like if you look at the Lakers series these past 2 years that we've played against them, people were just like tearing Darvin Hams to shreds. And like, granted, he wasn't a good coach, but at the same time, like Pelinka didn't give him the tools necessary to like be a really good team. Whenever it came down to clutch time, you had to like choose between like D'Angelo Russell or Jared Vanderbilt. You know, it's like, you want a guy who can't defend anybody, or do you want a guy who's not going to score any, you know, like can just be left alone on offense? So I just think teams are just going to kind of, you know, trend more towards that, at least, you know, contending teams and like teams that are really focused on like trying to win now, you know?
Yeah.
So actually, it's kind of related to this because I do think that teams are going to try to have guys that can play on both sides of the ball on the floor at all times, particularly for their playoff rotations. And I think that that's one of the ways that the Boston Celtics have been able to be so successful. We talked a bit about, having multiple ball handlers on the floor, but even just having guys out there who can do something on offense, like say a Sam Hauser, who's a movement shooter. In relation to that, I think that for so long, since the really like prime LeBron years, the emphasis on offense in the NBA has been to try to get two on the ball, try to get the defense in rotation, and defenses trying to resist that in many ways. The small ball era, switch everything, all of that. But I actually think that defensively, one of the biggest changes we're going to see is defenses starting to embrace being in rotation. Not meant Some teams already do. I think the Nuggets are actually best defensively when they're flying around. I think that we saw in the NBA Finals for the one game Dallas was good. Yeah, they were containing the ball well, but it was a lot of team defense that was involved in that game, and that's how you defend a team like the Boston Celtics. Is just you're going to need a lot of endurance. You're going to need big guys with enough athleticism to cover ground, and you're going to need, like you described earlier, Zamora, that high level communication and chemistry defensively. And I think defenses starting to embrace existing in rotation more is going to be a lot more prevalent than we may think now because of how these offenses are evolving. Yeah, what about you, Will?
Yeah, mine kind of then bridges from you, where I was kind of riffing off the original question about like guards in the dunker spot and size, where it's like guards can be in the dunker spot when your other wings or forwards can dribble, because that's usually who's taking it in, and then because that guard's down there, the low man, whoever's there, is not a rim protector type because it's probably a guard. So I know the NBA is a copycat league. And originally, we kind of thought with the Warriors that it'd be this small ball, like point guard, everyone shoots threes kind of setup, which kind of happened. But then you get like the Jokic and the bigs who can play make, who do multiple things like Joel Embiid, which is harder to find. You can't just like find those people. You can't just replicate that. So now I'm thinking more the easier thing to kind of replicate is like the Celtics, and like kind of like you're saying, where these offenses are evolving in this way where you have players with size who can defend and shoot threes, but can also like dribble, and like can ball handle and play make. And I think a lot of people adapted.
All around
Yeah,
perfect basketball players.
yeah. It's just like
Yeah.
everyone kind of adapted the 3-point shot. They were like, put the 3-point shot in your game for spacing. Now it's going to be like, put ball handling in your game. And now it's like, we're going to have all these players who can do, and we're going to be leaning more into positionless basketball unless you're like those super specific like Jokic or like a Kyrie, or you're just like so good at what you do that it doesn't really matter like whether you're huge or whether you're a little smaller, you're going to be played because you're lethal on offense. But I think it's trending towards like a Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum type archetype.
Yeah. I think, cause like I have a friend, I don't know if you guys follow him, but shout out P-Watt Muse. He's one of my friends on Twitter. But he plays rugby, and I don't know anything about rugby. And he was explaining it to me one day, and it's kind of the same thing. He was like, I was like, so explain to me the difference between like football, like American football and rugby. And he's like, in rugby, everybody has to be good at everything. He's like, like an offensive lineman in football might be good at specific things, but he's not going to be able to outrun everybody when he gets the ball. Everybody has to be able to do everything. And I think it's similar to what we're saying here is like, people are just going to start drafting basketball players. They're not going to draft a shooter. They're not going to draft a big man. They're not going to draft a point guard. They're going to draft basketball players, a guy who can do pretty much a little bit of everything.
Who can hoop. Yeah.
Who can hoop.
And players are just getting better as it goes along, so I could see it.
Yeah.
I will say too, sort of related to this and like the defense point too. One of the things I was watching some WNBA, and I think I was watching the Aces play. Maybe it was the Mercury. Anyway, the announcers were talking about how this team had a really high field goal percentage on the game, but they were down like double digits because I believe it was the Aces had forced so many turnovers. And it reminded me of our series against the Suns last year, where the Suns shot over 50% from the field most of that series, but most of those games were blowouts because we were winning the possession battle through rebounding and also forcing turnovers. And I just think that fly around mentality, like defense is so much less about just like lowering the effective field goal percentage of the other team, although it also helps if you can force misses on shots, but just winning that possession battle. And one of the ways to do that is forcing, turnovers. And a lot of that is ball pressure and rotations and communication and all of that as well. And, being a well-rounded player stops you from, let's say like Jaylen Brown got a lot better. I wouldn't like his handle did get a little bit better, but one of the things that we saw from him this year was that he was a lot better at making that quick read for that next pass when defenders were like helping onto him. So that there's like this back and forth, right? This tension between like these skilled players that also have to improve their feel and their IQ, combating these defenses that are now trying to just make every aspect of the offensive possession as difficult as possible. And it's interesting to watch. I've never been so enthralled with NBA defense before in my life. Okay, so our next question comes from Bucket Since 88 on Twitter. He asks, which team from either conference that isn't a contender, so 7 seed or lower, do you anticipate making the biggest internal leap and or vault themselves upward the most? Basically, who do you think will be the next year's Thunder? And I included like the Magic as an example of this as well this year. The Pacers, those kinds of teams. Zamora.
Oh, congrats on being our guest. You have to go first on every question.
Yes. So it's funny that you were actually just talking about like how you anticipate defense or like, the defensive roles to go from like embracing rotations and stuff like that and just being able to fly around and stuff like that. That's a big reason why I'm so high on Houston. I think Houston is going to take a big jump next year. I think they're going to be legit scary for a lot of teams because just cumulative athleticism wise, I don't know if there's another team as good as them. Like between Amen Thompson, Jalen Green, Tari Eason, Jabari, like they just have wings on wings. And Ime is like the perfect coach for that. I'm such a big Ime guy. Like I just think he's like legit one of the best coaches in the NBA. Like you go and you take the Celtics who were like at the time being, like had bad defensive tendencies and stuff like that. And then came in and flipped them to turning them into one of the best defenses. And it's like still a foundation that they're built on right now. He's gone for a little bit of time, comes back, coaches Houston and turns all these guys who are just pure athletes and like pretty much nothing else into like this fly around, crazy good defense that just like gets in everybody's faces and just ball pressures, doesn't ever give you any space to breathe, is always up in your jersey. I just think they're going to be like a really scary team next year. They got the number 3 pick in the draft this year. If they draft either Risa Shea or Reed Shepherd, like they're going to add more shooting. If any of their guys take a jump in their shooting, if Amen can learn to shoot a little bit, if Tari can learn to shoot a little bit, that's just going to make them way more dangerous. Şengün coming back is going to be huge. He has the potential to be an MVP caliber player, in my opinion. Like he's so good, that guy. I think Jalen Green. I'm high on Jalen Green, higher than most. I think like I'm not
He's
a
a
big Jalen
ridiculous
Green guy.
athlete.
Yeah,
He's a ridiculous athlete.
he
It's just
really is.
like we gotta get the consistency and the IQ to
Exactly.
catch up to
He's just
everything
got to
else.
buy into Ime's system and culture and all that stuff, you know? I think if they can coach him right, like, you know, put the right mentality into that kid, the sky's the limit for him.
That's a
Well,
good answer. I think that's probably one of the better answers. I'm looking at this and I'm either like, besides Rockets, because I definitely agree with you. I'm going like either Heat, maybe Spurs,
If
something
the
like
Spurs
that.
can get a good point guard
Yeah,
or just some type of identity. Like the
oh
coolest thing about
man,
the Spurs is like Wemby is so versatile that you can do anything you want with him. Like
yeah.
literally anything.
And they were looking pretty good at the end of the season. Like when
Yeah.
they didn't have much to play for, obviously they were just like, well, they obviously fucked up our chances a little bit.
they weren't
But
even playing anybody but Wemby in that game either. So
Yeah,
I
like he didn't
know.
rest, but like the rest of their starting lineup was playing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, it's like,
That was
you know,
really
the
good.
Grizzlies are going to be back because Jaw's going to be back. So I don't like consider that necessarily like a leap.
Yeah.
But like the Heat,
I
like
would,
they,
I could say that. I could see that though.
yeah,
I mean,
they're going to be good. You know, they're not going to be
yeah,
as
they're
bad
going to
as they
be good.
were. The Heat, if they
So
like get
yeah,
someone
with
or
the Heat, how's
something.
that different than the Grizzlies?
Well, because like I mean, the Heat didn't have any. Who was like their biggest injury? Like it wasn't like Jimmy was
They
out the
had
whole
injuries throughout the
season.
entire. I think their most
Kind of just
played
doubtless
lineup
stuff all
only
year.
played 100 minutes last year because they had so many injuries
Mhm.
just throughout the
Just
year, and then
everything was
obviously
just
Jimmy
nagging.
was a big one at the end,
Yeah,
especially.
Yeah.
I think it's just like I'm relying on the Heat ethos where they attract people, they can make big moves. I know like free agency's over, so it's like they're not going to just like get people walking in there like they used to have. But I could just see them doing something that kind of gets them back to where they're like a top 3 seed next season in the East as opposed to like the 8th seed. Because I think they're, you know, like they were the 8th seed last year and they went all the way to the finals, which was great. But I think like they're seeing more the reality of this team, and I think that they're not going to wait around and just like let this team be the same. I think there's going to be some changes.
Yeah, Riley's not going to settle on them
Yeah.
being, you know.
I don't know. I think Riley's been. I think his reputation precedes him. Is all I'll say. I do think that like Jimmy for Paul George would be a hilarious sign and trade.
Mm.
Okay, so I'm gonna copy Zamora's answer because I do think it's Houston. They were an incredibly formidable home team this season. I believe they were a top 4 home team in the conference in a very tough conference. They gave us problems. We went like, what was it, 1-3 against them in the season series. And that was especially because of the defense. But I do think that another year is going to just improve their offensive chemistry, and their shooting could just improve because they were a below average shooting team last year, and that could just get better. Maybe they make some moves to, I don't know, get a movement shooter or try to improve the spot up guys. But their bench minutes really suffer because of the backup point guard and backup big situations. I don't know if they're going to use Steven Adams this year or they're going to try to trade him in the offseason. But I think that's another just place that they can make an improvement because those backup units are very hit or miss for such a young team. But I do think that the defense is going to hold. They actually dropped off toward the end of the year, but they were a top 5 defense for large stretches of last season, and I think that Ime could just kind of get them to be more consistent on the road. And then we're looking at a team that could contend for a top 4, top 5 seed in the West next year. Maybe out of nowhere. And we saw for a while there, they were firmly in the playoff picture despite their road record because their home record was so good. Then they kind of fell, and then it was really about like, are they going to keep the Warriors out of the play-in or not? But I think they're going to go into next season with a lot of confidence.
Yeah, they're super
Okay.
young.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so our last question comes from Dan Favale. He asked if you can pick any 5 players in the league who would populate your most ideal small ball lineups, who would they be? I'll go first to give you guys a little break on this one. My ideal small ball lineup, involves Jokic center, Tatum at 4, Aaron Nesmith at the 3, Steph at point guard, and SGA at shooting guard. I think we have just enough length to satisfy my needs in a lineup. And he asked this question because I have my qualms with small ball, because I don't think that most teams really have the personnel to implement it well consistently. But obviously, in this made-up lineup, everybody can dribble, pass, and shoot, and we're not sacrificing too much size.
Wait, so can Jokic count as small ball?
Yeah. Your small ball can still
Yeah.
include a real center, as long as you're not going like super big. I think I'm actually undersized at every position except 5 and 2.
If you think your team is undersized, my team is going to be really undersized.
All point guard lineup. Let's go.
Mine is Stephen Curry at the point. I went with Derek White at the 2. I went Anthony Edwards at the 3. I went J-Dub at the 4, and I went Draymond at the 5.
Okay.
I went essentially like true small ball. As I try to make it as small yet competitive as I could. So everybody is a pretty good defender. I mean, Steph is, good compared to what he used to be. I think Ant is strong enough that he can contend with most threes.
Yeah.
Jada plays the 4 as it is. Draymond, really small guy, but he holds his own against these giants. I don't know how he does it. Blows my mind. And then Steph is like the greatest small ball player probably ever.
Yeah. Got to give that to him.
Oh, man. I'm also going to leave Jokic off just because I feel like if you're employing this small ball lineup, the opposing team's going to play a bigger player. They're not going to leave some small dudes out there that Jokic is going to cook. So I'm just going to, for this thought experiment, go with.
Who are you facing that Jokic can't just also cook?
Well, yeah, I know. But it's like, I feel like some of the advantages of small ball is that like you're kind of forcing the other team to have to go a similar direction, because it's like if you have a smaller team out there, they can't like keep up with the speed and such. And so like if you're trying to force them to not have like a big rim protector type person out there. So I'm like, if we're just playing Jokic, then the other team's probably just going to like keep a big dude out there as opposed to like trying to put in like a Nas Reed type, and Jokic is going to cook him even worse than who would be like a bigger, stouter player. You know what I'm saying?
I'm still like, I think Jokic is cooking in my lineup because he has spacing up the wazoo. And if they try, he's going to cook whoever in one-on-one coverage with all that space. And if they try to send help, it's just curtains.
He's playing against Cat and Rudy Gobert.
Well, we're cooking. We're cooking.
You just pick the GOAT. All right. That's all. That's all you got to say. Is I picked the GOAT on my team.
Yeah.
And
oh man.
But Will, why don't you share your lineup?
I'm gonna go with like Steph, Drew Holiday, Luka, something like Jason Tatum, and then LeBron. LeBron playing center.
Nice. Okay.
Okay. That's
like
3
that.
small forwards.
Hell yeah.
This
is the trend that I want the NBA to get to.
I feel like mine is cooking yours, but
yeah. Well, I mean, if this is the matchup, then I'm probably
we both have Tatum. So I was going to say Tatum can guard LeBron. Who's guarding Tatum on my team? I could put Nesmith on Tatum some. We'll let him score. Turn Tatum into a scorer. We'll see how that turns out.
It's a fun experiment. That was a good question. And I like that Dan has forced you into contemplating more small ball.
Yeah,
concepts.
I was going to say that.
Even my small ball is actually medium ball.
Yeah. You're using like the one cheat code of Jokic to get out of this.
All right. So thank you, Zamora, for joining us for this offseason overview and for our mailbag. I wanted to just let the listeners know to look out for our next episodes dealing with the Nuggets offseason. We have a draft preview coming up with CT Fazio, who we talked about a little bit as our Nuggets Twitter draft guru. And we'll discuss even more about the types of prospects that Denver will be looking at in the draft next week. And then after the draft, we will have a review of how the draft went for Nuggets, and maybe we'll talk about some of the selections of other teams as well. Will, do you want to take us out?
Yes, but before I do that, Zamora, tell people listening where they can find
yes.
you and about your other podcasts and anything else that you want to plug.
Plug everything.
All right. The big screen. So on YouTube, at Talking BS, go and subscribe there. That is where I'm doing all these off-season previews, and I just talk sports, period, over there. I host a podcast with my brothers, Oso and Jake. It's called the Box State Boys Podcast. It has nothing to do with sports, and it's just a whole lot of bullshit where we just crack jokes and talk about our lives and, all that stuff. So it's just a fun podcast, just messing around. Yeah. And then I just started a TikTok. So if you guys like more of the quick content, talking.bs, where you can find my big board I'm releasing right now. Yeah, that's all the places you can find me. Go follow me and subscribe.
Yes. Well, thank you again for joining us. That's it for us. So if you've made it this far, like and subscribe and turn the notification bell on YouTube and leave a rating on any podcast platforms that you're listening to. We're still trying to get on Apple Podcasts. And just remember that winning is fun and losing sucks.